Hey guys, this is gonna be a guide about how to play the newest team in Reverse1999, Plantpromptu. There's a whole lot of passive stuff happening with this team here, so in that particular case, it is better to just straight hop into battle and explain things from here. So let's do exactly that. The first thing that you have to understand is that you want to accumulate Moxie for two characters here, which are Paper Heron, your main DPS, and 2 Fairy, your sustain. So your highest priority is to accumulate Moxie for those two characters as fast as possible. From turn 2 and onwards, we want to keep the buff Lily Nectar from AnAnLee alive at all times. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna use everything that we have with Paper Heron and 2 Fairy right out of the gate. This will keep AP +1 alive, and here is a very important note that even if you do not need healing or anything like that, you don't need to sustain yourself, you still gonna use the healing incantation for 2 Fairy. Because not only will this give you Moxie, but it will increase the damage dealt +20% to impromptu incantations for the round. That is also very important to keep in mind later on when we are actually unlocking our ultimate abilities. So this is going to be your very first turn. Now, since everyone and their mom will have 2 Fairy at portrait number 1, her AP +1 actually lasts for 2 rounds. So you wouldn't necessarily need to cast it one more time this round, but you would still want to do this if you have the incantation available, because it would give you Moxie. And now you can see right here we have 0 incantations for Paper Heron and only 1 for 2 Fairy. This is the moment where we actually gonna reroll our hand. We're gonna play this one right here, the melody, and not the unfinished tune, because the unfinished tune will in the later stages lead to us removing an incantation from our hand, and that would also remove the inspiration that we have already accumulated. But we want to stack up upon as much inspiration as possible so that we can use our ultimates to the most amount of efficiency possible. Okay, here now round 2, this is where we cast the Lily Nectar from AnAnLee, and this will be active for 3 rounds, so we don't have to worry about that for quite a while. It is very important to do this on turn 2 though. After we have done that, we cast everything that we have available for 2 Fairy and for Paper Heron. Here it is also very important, right? As I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't necessarily need to cast the AP +1 right now. We could save it for the next round, but we don't do that because we want to accumulate Moxie for 2 Fairy. This is super important because whenever you unlock her ultimate, you gain access to a debuff called Neuralgia, and the impromptu incantations that hit the target with Neuralgia on them will deal a tremendously higher amount of damage. So you want to unlock this ultimate as fast as possible, but you only would ever have to do this once, because the Neuralgia debuff, it will last forever until the enemy actually dies. So after we have accomplished the ultimate for 2 Fairy, we don't need to play her as much actively anymore, and then we can use AnAnLee more. Okay, step by step though. So what we want to accomplish this round is to gain 1 Moxie for Paper Heron and 1 Moxie for 2 Fairy, as you can see, and then on turn number 4 we would have unlocked both of their ultimates all together, and this is where this team usually ends the battle. And yeah, one more thing, right? We could play this team without Kiparina and with Mercuria in it instead. And just in case, I see a lot of people, for some reason they worry that 2 Fairy will alone not be able to sustain the team. That is not true, because you will have, not only does 2 Fairy heal you passively, because whenever you use an incantation or you consume Eureka with your allies, she will accumulate something called baby tooth. She will then, at the start of every single round, consume these baby tooths to heal your team just like that, without you even using any AP for it. But also, you want to, or you even have to, use her healing incantations actively all the time. You see me using this, even though I don't even need heal, I still use it. So it is an absolute necessity, and you will have more than enough heal. You will overheal, right? You heal more than your characters would have HP. So yeah, you don't need Kiparina in this team at all, but keep in mind she is still the best in slot, because we are kind of squishy and we could run into scenarios where we get one shot, but this will almost never happen. So don't worry about that too much, just a side note that I wanted to mention. And here again, so one incantation with Paper Heron, one incantation with 2 fairy. We would prefer this to be the AP one, but we only have the heal, so we're gonna use that. And then we're gonna keep blasting, of course. Here's something very, very important to note. So please remember that. You can see that I would bet, at least, most players here would use the incantations that have 9 inspiration accumulated for them this turn. But that is not the correct play, because you want to save up and accumulate as much inspiration as you possibly can until you unlock the ultimate for Paper Heron. And after you casted the ultimate with Paper Heron, you then unleash all the incantations with as much inspiration, accumulated onto them to maximize your efficiency. So now I have both ultimates unlocked for 2 fairy and Paper Heron, which is what I want, and now I can just go ahead and I could use, for example, already AnAnLee to accumulate Moxie, but no, that is because her incantation right now in this specific scenario here has way too much inspiration unlocked. I wanna save that for next turn when I have the ultimate ready with Paper Heron. So this turn I'm just gonna go ahead and use stuff with the lowest amount of inspiration accumulated possible. So I'm gonna go ahead and that. See, now I have only incantations left with 5 and 9 Moxie respectively. I don't want to use these incantations this turn at all costs, so I'm just gonna move an incantation and call it a day. And you can see that our array, it would run out here in 2 rounds, but no worries, we have our ultimate unlocked. As you can see, this is also a reason why it is very, very, very important to play it like I just explained. If you would play this differently, your array would run out before you have your ultimate unlocked again. That is never something that you would want, and you can see that the time window here is pretty tight. You don't have a lot of breathing room, so make sure that every single turn you use as many incantations with Paper Heron as you possibly can. Every single turn you would, best case scenario, use 2 incantations with Paper Heron, right? This is a little bit needless to explain because this is your main DPS and you want it actively, but I'm mentioning it just in case. Okay, and here it goes. Now that we have our ultimates unlocked, we use the debuff here, the ultimate with 2 fairy first. That will apply neuralgia to the main target. You always use 2 fairies ultimate on the enemy target with the most amount of HP, percentage HP for that matter. Then you wanna go ahead and use Paper Heron's ult immediately, because the more Eureka you have at your disposal, the moment you use this ultimate, the more beneficial and the more damage it will actually deal, and yeah, the more beneficial it will be to you. And now comes another very, very important part. Here, after Paper Heron's ultimate, we have to know which of our incantations actually increase our damage by the most amount possible. And those incantations are 2 fairies heal, the Paper Heron's buff, and AnAnLee's Taoist rune. You can see we only have one of those incantations here at our disposal. That means we're gonna reroll and we pray that we get more of those incantations that I just counted out at our disposal to use this turn. So again, 2 Fairy, Paper Heron, both use their ult. 2 Fairy first, then Paper Heron. And now, Paper Heron's buff, the Taoist rune with AnAnLee. And the best case scenario would be to use 2 Fairy Seal. Now we don't have 2 Fairy Seal available. That means we're gonna use the incantation with the most amount of inspiration accumulated as possible. That would be the attack incantation here for Paper Heron in my case, because this one has 9 inspiration accumulated. And this is how you play Plantpromptu. It is very, very important to do it correctly, because if you, again, right, if you don't, then your array with Paper Heron will run out. You will miss out on a lot of damage because you don't use 2 Fairies ult in combination with Paper Heron's ultimate, and you have to make sure you use it first and onto the right target. You know what I mean? And then you have to understand that what to do, or what is the most beneficial thing to do to maximize your damage output after you used both 2 Fairies and Paper Heron's ultimate. I just explained exactly which incantations to use and what to do if you don't have them at your disposal at the time. And after this, you're gonna go ahead and do the same exact thing, but not with 2 Fairy, but with AnAnLee. You know what I mean? And keep in mind, I didn't pay too much attention to this to keep the Lily Nectar alive. But again, this is not your highest priority in the early game. In the first 4 turns, right? You don't have to keep the Lily Nectar alive. It would of course still be beneficial to, with your AP +1, you know, you can use Lily Nectar, 2 incantations with 2 Fairy, 2 incantations with Paper Heron. That would be the best case scenario, but that will not always be possible because RNG will not allow you that. Okay, so now we want to use Paper Heron, right? Of course, our main DPS. So we're gonna go ahead and do that to accumulate the Moxie. Now we want to use 2 Fairy as well, very, very actively. So let's go for the Lily Nectar first, then do the rest of the stuff. It's actually better to buff first, then attack. And now we're gonna use everything that we would have available with AnAnLee. The best case scenario would be to use the Taoist rune here. I don't have that, so I go for AP +1 instead. And that's gonna be about it, right? Keep the after we have used our ultimates, we only want to use 2 Fairy every 2 rounds to keep the AP +1 alive. Everything else would then be up to Paper Heron and AnAnLee. And that's how you're gonna play the team, right? With Mercuria, you want to make sure that you keep the crit buff alive at all times, just like it is with the Lily Nectar. But still, that is still not the highest of your priorities, because you only want to use incantations with Paper Heron and 2 Fairy to accumulate their Moxie. Let me repeat that one more time. Once you have used 2 Fairies ultimate once, you only use her if you need to heal actively, and every 2 rounds to keep the AP +1 alive. Okay. And yeah, the rest explains itself. Here we have 2 Paper Heron's ultimate one more time. We're gonna go ahead and use that. Remember the incantations that I counted out that are most beneficial. 2 Fairy heal, we don't have that. Taoist rune with 2 Fairy, we don't have that. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna use our melody to reroll and pray. Here we go, right? Taoist rune, we have the buff for AnAnLee. We have 2 Fairies here. That is the perfect rotation right here on your screen. And what are we gonna do after that? We're gonna use the incantation with the most amount of inspiration accumulated. And that's gonna be it. That is really how you play Plantpromptu in version 3.4 right now. Let's take a look at the Psychubes and the perfect resonances for all of our teammates here. Paper Heron uses a signature Psycube called Wayfarer of the DAO. Basically, the rule of thumb for all of the Psycubes in your team is that they increase your a stat by your team consuming Eureka. You will see this is a trend here. Here, the signature Psycube for Paper Heron that you can obtain in the story shop says, for each Eureka consumed by the team, all allies gain damage dealt plus a certain amount of percentages. And that is exactly what you want. It goes on that if the carrier is a plant character, the deployed array additionally grants incantation might plus 12% to all allies. This effect is removed, or it would be removed if the array would be running out. That is never gonna happen if you play it correctly though. So you see, your team, anyone consumes Eureka and regain damage dealt increased. Here, the best in slot Psycube for 2 fairy is the signature Psycube for Barcelona called AD0APQE0UDRSOAX0JDhFK0QlBCgwKSJAAkwT LVL. And here, when an ally consumes Eureka, accumulate points of inspiration. Whenever an ally consumes a Eureka, all allies gain damage dealt plus a certain amount of percent again. And this stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks up, right? There's also more shenanigans here going on again, like we gain an instance for our impromptu incantations, and this can trigger up like 2 times per round. But the kicker is we consume Eureka, we increase our damage dealt. Here the same thing. The best in slot Psycube for AnAnLee is this one right here, called In Their Figures. What it does is, for each Eureka consumed by the team, grant incantation might plus a certain amount of percent to all allies. It stacks up, right? That's the whole thing. Here, look at Skipperina's signature Psycube Aurora after winter as well. When the carrier casts a buff, okay, we gain attack, stacks up to 10 times, but here, for every 1 Eureka consumed by allies, grant critical damage plus. This stacks up to 30 times. See, and this is how, yeah, we are medium speed, right? We end battles at turn 4. Most battles will this team end on turn 4. But not only that, we, due to using the correct Psycubes, also have a way of scaling a little bit into the late game. Not really hardcore scaling here, but at least a little bit. We will have the 30 stacks accumulated by round 4 anyway, so it's not really scaling, but you get the point. There we go. Let's take a look at the resonances. The perfect resonance for Paper Heron is established around the fact that she, when entering battle, grants a buff called True Guidance to her allies. That leads to her contributing 15% of her attack stat to all of her allies. That's why for her resonance we go for the most amount of attack stat increase possible. This is also why we use the resonance pattern Hyper, because this one gives us the most amount of, you guessed it, attack stat increase. I will leave a link to this in the description down below, so you can just copy the plan and use it for yourself if you are interested. This is a plan for level 10. 2 Fairy's specialty is that her healing actually can crit and has an increased critical hit rate by plus 30% and more. That is what we gonna double down upon with our resonance. Here we use the special piece Stupefaction because this will increase your critical hit rate more than anything else would. And for the most part, her resonance patterns, her other patterns, are also focused on gaining the most amount of critical hit rate possible so that our healing crits. That's gonna be it. You find the code for this one also in the description down below. For AnAnLee, it's honestly whatever. We're just gonna go for the most amount of beneficial stat increases possible here. We're gonna use the special piece Genuity, and then we're gonna deck it out with raw stats, like whatever is the most beneficial, right? Gain as much different stats as you possibly can, and that's going to be the best case scenario for AnAnLee there. We do not focus on a specific stat here, so you can kind of go wherever you want. If you want to use the same resonance patterns as I do, link in the description, bros. Now let's hop into and talk a little bit about portraits. You know that you use 2Fairy at least P1 because her AP+1 would now last 2 rounds instead of just 1 round. We all know already how good this is from Flutterpage and Aleph. Then her portrait number 2, that would be very, very beneficial for us to increase the damage output that we have, and it would also increase the neuralgia because this can now trigger up to 4 times instead of just 3, and so on and so forth, right? Damage output is increased by P2, and this is where we would stop. The recommended one is P1, there you can stop. If you really want to min-max and go for another good portrait, go for P2. You want to do the same thing as you did with 2Fairy. If you play 2Fairy P2, your impromptu incantations, thanks to the neuralgia debuff, can hit 4 times for increased damage instead of just 3 times. And here, with Paper Heron's portrait number 2, you do this exact same thing, but through your array instead of due to your debuff with your ultimate, right? You can also now, your impromptu incantations can now attack up to 4 times each round instead of just 3. This makes a lot of sense and synergizes very well if you also have 2Fairy at P2. So if you can get both Paper Heron and P2 at Paper Heron and 2Fairy at P2, that would be very, very good synergy to increase your damage output here. Then your P5 would increase the amount of impromptu incantations that would deal increased damage to 5 instead of just 4. So yeah, P2 and P5 for Paper Heron are the big power spikes. Recommended is to just stop at P2. The other 2 teammates like AnAnLee, she will stay at P0 because as you can see here, her portraits are absolutely pathetic and they would need to see an update in order for you to ever consider going for portraits for her. And the same scenario occurs for either Skipperina or Mercuria, whoever you want to play with as well. Now Mercuria has a pretty significant P5 and stuff, you know. For Mercuria you could make some arguments to go for some portraits, but in general it is also recommended to just stay at P0 for her, because you would need to go quite deep here to either P3 or P5 to make the investment worth it. So just stay at P0. And if you want to get portraits for that team, go for P1 aka P2 for 2Fairy and P2 Paper Heron. I hope that video was fun and informative. If you like Reverse1999 content in general, please consider leaving a follow on my channel. I would really appreciate it. But until next time, take care of yourselves, have a great day, look at how gorgeous 2Fairy is, and we love this game.